Comrades, let us not deceive ourselves with illusions of fairness and merit. The society in which we live is not an impartial arbiter of talent, effort, or virtue. No, it is a machine designed with ruthless precision, a structure built to create winners and losers, to assign each human being a role before they even draw their first breath. You were not chosen. You were assigned. Your labor, your dreams, your time, your very life have been claimed by a system that exists solely to perpetuate the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few. Open your eyes and see the truth. Every law, every institution, every so-called opportunity in this society exists not to elevate the many but to secure the dominance of the few. The factories, the offices, the markets, these are not neutral spaces of advancement. They are theaters of exploitation where human labor is commodified, where the sweat of the many sustains the luxury of the few. The winners you see on television, in the boardrooms, on the covers of magazines, their victories are not earned in isolation. They are the products of a system that depends on your invisibility, your exhaustion, and your compliance. And yet, the system will tell you that it rewards hard work, that the poor suffer because they lack effort, because they lack discipline, because they have failed themselves. This is a lie, a cunning deception designed to prevent the working class from understanding the nature of its oppression. The rich do not prosper because they are more virtuous or more capable. They prosper because they own the means of production, because they appropriate the surplus labor of the workers, because they have embedded themselves in the very structures that decide who wins and who loses. Understand this. The inequality you endure is not accidental. It is intentional. It is systemic. Every long hour at the factory, every unpaid overtime, every anxiety-filled night spent worrying over bills is a mechanism through which capital maintains its grip. You are the source of wealth, and yet your labor is taken from you. Why? The system assigns others the role of the winner, the master, the owner. This is not the law of nature, it is the law of capitalism. But let us speak plainly, this is not inevitable. History is not static. The domination of the few over the many is neither eternal nor divine. It exists because we, the working class, have been divided and distracted. It exists because we have been trained to compete with one another instead of uniting, to believe that our individual suffering is a personal failure rather than a collective consequence. Class consciousness is our antidote, solidarity our weapon, and collective organization our strategy for liberation. Comrades, the first step in reclaiming your power is awareness. Understand that your oppression is structural, that your labor produces value that you never receive. Recognize that the roles assigned to you, loser, servant, wage laborer, are artificial, constructs maintained by a system designed to protect the few at the expense of the many. This is not merely a moral injustice. It is an economic and political reality that demands a response. Rise, not as isolated individuals, but as a united class. Organize where you work, in your neighborhoods, in every space where labor is gathered and controlled. Form associations, unions, and councils that can resist exploitation and reclaim the fruits of your labor. Demand not mere reform, for reform cannot dismantle the hierarchy of capital. Demand ownership, demand control, demand the socialization of the means of production, for only then can society be liberated from the tyranny of winners and losers. Do not wait for permission from those who benefit from your subjugation. Do not hope for fairness from those whose wealth depends on your struggle. Your emancipation lies in your own hands, in the unity of your class, in the conscious and determined struggle against exploitation. History is not made by the privileged. It is made by those who labor, those who create, those who resist. Comrades, the system has assigned you a role. But remember this. Roles can be broken, hierarchies can be overturned, and the architecture of oppression can be destroyed. The machinery that produces winners and losers is not invincible. It is a construct of human design, and it can be dismantled by human action. The task before us is urgent, the struggle is uncompromising, and the victory will belong to those who understand that only through collective power can we transform society itself. Let us rise together, not as scattered individuals, not as isolated victims, but as a united force capable of overturning the artificial distinctions that divide us. Let us reclaim our labor, reclaim our lives, and build a world where no human is assigned a role of subjugation, where the fruits of our labor are shared equitably, and where society serves humanity rather than wealth. The system needs winners and losers, yes, but we are the many, and together we can write a new history in which the roles of oppression are abolished, and freedom is no longer the privilege of a few, but the right of all. The society in which we live presents itself as a realm of opportunity, a marketplace of talent and effort, where success is supposedly the reward of diligence and failure the consequence of personal shortcomings. Yet this is an illusion, a carefully constructed narrative that masks the real mechanics of power and exploitation. The system does not operate on fairness, and it does not measure worth through merit. From the moment of birth, human beings are funneled into roles determined not by ability or virtue, but by the needs of an economic and political order that exist to preserve the dominance of a few. The winners are not those who deserve prosperity because of their intellect, industriousness, or moral fiber. They are those whose positions have been secured by structures designed to ensure that wealth and privilege remain concentrated. Conversely, the losers are not those who have failed in some moral or personal sense. They are the many whose labor, creativity, and potential are appropriated and constrained to maintain the advantages of the few. The myth of meritocracy is a smokescreen, a deception used to persuade the majority to accept their subjugation, to compete against one another for scraps, and to believe that inequality is natural rather than orchestrated. This illusion is reinforced through education, media, and social narratives that glorify individual success while ignoring the systemic barriers that determine life outcomes. Schools teach children to compete as though the world is a fair playing field, yet they fail to reveal them. Uneven distribution of resources, connections, and inherited advantages that predetermine many futures. The stories of self-made entrepreneurs and rags-to-riches transformation are celebrated as examples of merit, but they are exceptions, deliberately highlighted to obscure the reality that the vast majority are born into conditions that limit their opportunities. In reality, every workplace, every institution, and every market functions not merely to facilitate human endeavor, but to assign roles that serve the accumulation of capital. Labor is divided, tasks are allocated, and hierarchies are maintained, so that some may rise while others remain tethered to survival. The system is structured to ensure that the labor of the many enriches the few, that value is extracted and concentrated, and that the majority internalizes the belief that their assigned position is a reflection of personal inadequacy rather than structural design. This orchestration is evident in the economic disparities that dominate modern society. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a tiny elite is not an accidental byproduct of talent or hard work. It is the intended outcome of a system that assigns human beings predetermined roles. Social mobility, the illusion that anyone can rise with enough effort, is largely a controlled and limited phenomenon, allowing just enough movement to pacify discontent while preserving the overarching hierarchy. Even within workplaces, promotions and rewards are not purely based on skill or contribution, but on alignment with management interests, social networking, and the perpetuation of existing power structures. The system is engineered to create competition among the many, pitting workers against one another, so that solidarity is weakened and awareness of collective oppression is diminished. When individuals internalize the idea that their failures are personal rather than systemic, they become complicit in their own subjugation, blaming themselves for circumstances that are imposed upon them. The division of society into winners and losers also serves a psychological function, providing legitimacy to the privileges of the elite. By framing inequality as a product of merit, the system convinces both the successful and the struggling that the status quo is just. Those who succeed feel validated, believing that their role as winners is deserved, while those who struggle are persuaded to accept their hardships as a personal failing. This Narrative prevents the formation of a collective consciousness, the realization that the majority share common material interests and that their labor is systematically exploited to sustain the wealth of a minority. It is crucial to recognize that these roles are not fixed by nature, they are socially and economically imposed. The laborer in the factory, the clerk at the office, the service worker, and the teacher all occupy positions within a hierarchy that assigns value not based on humanity or potential but on the needs of capital. The system does not reward virtue or effort equitably. It rewards compliance, alignment with power, and the reproduction of its own structures. Understanding this truth is the first step toward liberation. Awareness that your assigned role is not a reflection of your worth but a function of systemic design allows the possibility of resistance. When the many recognize that the hierarchy of winners and losers is artificial, constructed, and maintained by the few for their advantage, the path toward collective action opens. Solidarity becomes a tool to dismantle the myth of meritocracy, to challenge the structure that assign these roles, and to reclaim agency over our lives and labor. Capitalism is often portrayed as a system of opportunity, progress, and individual achievement, yet beneath this veneer lies a relentless engine of exploitation, a mechanism designed to extract labor and convert it into profit for a small class of owners. At its core, capitalism depends on the appropriation of the fruits of human labor, transforming the creativity, effort, and energy of the working majority into wealth that benefits those who own the means of production. The worker produces value through work, yet receives only a fraction of that value in the form of wages, while the surplus, the excess generated by labor beyond what is necessary to sustain the worker's existence, is claimed by capitalists. This surplus value is the foundation of capitalist profit, the invisible mechanism through which the few accumulate immense wealth, while the majority remain tethered to subsistence. Every day, workers pour their time and energy into factories, offices, farms, and service industries, creating goods and services essential for society. Yet the wealth produced by this labor is not distributed according to the contribution made. It is systematically siphoned away to those who control production, who reap the benefits of work they did not perform, and who perpetuate their dominance by controlling access to resources, education, and opportunity. The extraction of labor is not a passive process, but an active structure embedded in the laws, norms, and institutions of capitalist society. Work is organized and measured, tasks are subdivided, and time is regimented to maximize output while minimizing compensation. Workers are often compelled to accept conditions that are detrimental to their health, security, and well-being because their labor is commodified. It is treated as something that can be bought and sold, detached from the human being who produces it. In this system, the worker's life becomes a tool for profit rather than an end in itself, a resource to be deployed for the enrichment of others. Capitalism also relies on the illusion that workers are free agents, making choices and exercising autonomy in the marketplace. Yet the reality is that most people labor under conditions of necessity. They must sell their labor to survive. This coerced exchange masks the underlying exploitation, making it appear as though labor is voluntarily traded for wages, when in truth the worker has little alternative to selling their capacity to work. Furthermore, capitalism alienates workers from the very products of their labor. The fruits of work are appropriated by owners and stripped of connection to the individual who created them. A garment maker produces clothing that she will never personally own. A factory worker assembles goods that enrich executives he will never meet. A software engineer writes code that generates profit for shareholders, while their own compensation remains limited. This alienation extends beyond the economic to the social and psychological. Workers are estranged from the processes of creation, from the satisfaction of seeing their labor realized, and from one another, as competition is encouraged to prevent collective resistance. The system is designed to perpetuate itself. Capitalists reinvest surplus value to expand production, consolidate ownership, and increase efficiency, further concentrating wealth and power. This dynamic deepens inequality and ensures that exploitation is continuous, not episodic. Technological advancement, often presented as a human achievement, serves primarily to increase productivity and extract more labor value rather than to liberate workers from toil. The appropriation of labor also extends into the broader social and political sphere. Laws, regulations, and state institutions are frequently aligned with the interests of capital, protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and suppressing labor movements, all in service of maintaining the extraction of surplus value. When workers attempt to resist through strikes, unions, or demands for fair compensation, they are met with legal and economic mechanisms designed to preserve the flow of profit to owners. Exploitation is therefore systemic, embedded in the very structures of society, and not merely the result of individual greed or immorality. It is a condition inherent to the capitalist mode of production, where the wealth of a few depends upon the labor of the many, and where social and economic hierarchies are maintained through the ongoing extraction of value. Recognizing this dynamic is crucial for understanding the inequalities and injustices that characterize modern economies. The labor of workers is the source of all wealth, yet they are denied the full fruits of their own activity. Without the labor of the many, capitalists could not accumulate, expand, or dominate. The entire system rests upon the exploitation of labor. It is the hidden engine that powers economic growth, funds luxury, and perpetuates the dominance of a minority over the majority. To challenge this exploitation requires awareness that labor is not merely a commodity but a fundamental human capacity that has been appropriated. Only by reclaiming control over our work, uniting as a collective, and demanding that the value we produce serves society as a whole can the appropriation of labor be confronted, and the oppressive structures of capitalism be resisted. Inequality in society is often framed as the result of personal shortcomings, poor choices, or a lack of effort, yet this narrative is a deliberate deception that conceals the true mechanisms of social and economic stratification. Inequality is not an accident, nor is it the natural consequence of individual merit. It is structural, embedded in the organization of society itself, and intentional, designed to perpetuate the dominance of a few over the many. From birth, individuals enter a world where opportunities are distributed unevenly, where access to education, healthcare, housing, and social networks is determined less by ability than by the conditions into which one is born. Those born into wealth inherit advantages that compound over time: better schools, safer neighborhoods, connections that open doors, and the financial security to pursue ambitions without the immediate pressure of survival. Meanwhile, those born into poverty face barriers that severely limit their potential, from underfunded schools to insecure housing, from limited access to health care to the constant stress of economic precarity. These structural inequalities are reinforced by the very institutions that claim to be neutral or meritocratic. The legal system, education system, financial markets, and labor markets all operate in ways that reproduce existing hierarchies. Laws protecting property, contracts, and corporate interests ensure that wealth remains concentrated and transmitted across generations. Educational systems, while ostensibly designed to cultivate talent, often mirror social divisions, with resources concentrated in affluent areas while marginalized communities struggle with overcrowded classrooms, outdated materials, and limited extracurricular opportunities. Employment systems reward networks, credentials, and prior connections rather than pure ability, ensuring that those already advantaged are more likely to rise while others remain constrained. The consequences of this structural inequality are profound. Economic opportunity is not equally accessible. Social mobility is restricted. Life chances are predetermined by circumstances beyond individual control. The system creates the illusion of personal failure to justify the disparities it produces. When someone struggles financially or fails to achieve recognition or security, the narrative insists that it is their own fault, that they lacked talent, perseverance, or intelligence. This narrative obscures the reality that structural barriers, not personal failings, shape outcome. Capitalism, in particular, is a system designed to concentrate wealth and power. It relies on the extraction of labor from the majority to enrich a minority, and it perpetuates inequality as a feature rather than a flaw. Wage structures, property ownership, access to capital and control over resources are all organized to ensure that some accumulate wealth while others remain dependent on selling their labor. Social stratification is not incidental but fundamental to the system's operation. Inequality is maintained intentionally through policies and practices that appear neutral but reinforce advantage. Tax codes, zoning laws, financial regulations, and labor laws are structured to favor those who already possess wealth, while social programs are often limited, conditional, or underfunded, ensuring that the marginalized remain vulnerable. Cultural narratives reinforce this as well, presenting inequality as natural or deserved, praising the success of the few as examples of individual merit, and framing the struggles of the many as personal shortcomings. This ideological apparatus is critical to sustaining structural inequality. Without it, the oppressed might recognize the systemic forces shaping their lives and unite to demand transformation. By portraying inequality as a matter of personal failure, the system diverts attention from the mechanism of power and profit that produce it, discouraging collective action and maintaining social control. The intentional nature of inequality can also be seen in the way crises are handled. Economic downturns, recessions, or pandemics often disproportionately harm those already disadvantaged while preserving or even enhancing the wealth and influence of the elite. Bailouts, subsidies, and policies favoring corporations and the wealthy illustrate a conscious decision to protect certain classes while others bear the cost. Structural inequality extends beyond economics into every aspect of social life, including health outcomes, political influence, and cultural representation. Those with fewer resources face higher rates of illness, reduced life expectancy, and diminished access to care, while those with wealth wield disproportionate influence over policy, legislation, and public discourse. Cultural institutions often reflect the perspectives of the privileged, marginalizing voices that challenge the status quo. Recognizing inequality as structural and intentional is crucial for understanding its persistence and for identifying paths toward change. The disparities in wealth, opportunity, and power are not the result of random misfortune or personal inadequacy. They are deliberately produced and maintained through the organization of economic, political, and social systems. Only by acknowledging this reality can the oppressed begin to challenge the structures that constrain them, to build solidarity and to envision alternatives in which access to resources, opportunity, and influence is determined not by birth or class, but by collective human need and the principles of justice and equality. The path to liberation for the working class and the oppressed does not lie in isolated struggle or individual effort, for under a system designed to divide and exploit, solitary resistance is easily crushed. True emancipation arises from the awakening of class consciousness, the understanding that one's circumstances are not merely personal misfortunes, but are shared experiences rooted in systemic oppression. Class consciousness is the recognition that the economic, social, and political structure of society operate to maintain the dominance of a few while subjugating the many, and that the power to change these structures lies not in appealing to the rulers, but in the collective strength of those who produce society's wealth. Without this awareness, workers are left to compete against one another, believing that the failures of one are due to individual shortcomings rather than the engineered inequalities of the system. The cultivation of class consciousness transforms this understanding into a shared reality, uniting people in the knowledge that their interests are aligned and that their liberation is inseparable from that of their fellow workers. It is the spark that ignites solidarity, the binding force that converts awareness into action. Solidarity is the recognition that the struggle of one is the struggle of all, and that only through mutual support, cooperation, and joint effort can systemic oppression be challenged. When workers stand together, they resist the isolating forces of competition, fear, and division that are central to the preservation of capitalist power. Strikes, protests, unions, cooperative enterprises, and political movements are all expressions of solidarity, manifestations of the collective strength that emerges when individuals perceive themselves as part of a larger social and historical mission. Collective organization is the practical realization of class consciousness and solidarity. It involves structuring the efforts of many into coordinated strategy, capable of confronting the entrenched interests of the ruling class. Dispersed and unorganized, individual acts of resistance may be suppressed, ignored, or rendered ineffectual. Organized, they acquire the force to disrupt exploitation, challenge authority, and assert control over the conditions of life and labor. Organizations provide platforms for education, planning, and mobilization, allowing workers to transform shared grievances into collective demands and to translate abstract understanding into concrete action. Through organization, the working class can challenge the institutions and mechanisms that perpetuate inequality, from labor practices and corporate hierarchies to laws and state policies designed to defend the interests of the elite. Moreover, organization is a school of empowerment, teaching participants the skills of leadership, negotiation, strategy, and solidarity, while simultaneously fostering a sense of agency and purpose. The interplay between class consciousness, solidarity, and collective organization is crucial because each element reinforces the others. Awareness of shared exploitation fuels a sense of moral and practical connection between workers, fostering solidarity that strengthens the bonds necessary for coordinated action. In turn, organized action demonstrates the power of unity, reinforcing consciousness and expanding the understanding of what is possible when the oppressed act together. Historical movements illustrate this dynamic, showing that substantial social change has never been achieved by isolated individuals, but through the mobilization of classes, communities, and collectives united by shared recognition of systemic injustice. Struggles for labor rights, social welfare, and political representation have succeeded only when workers and oppressed groups recognized their common interests and coordinated their efforts to confront the concentrated power of elites. The capitalist system, in particular, seeks to undermine these connections by promoting competition, individualism, and division among workers. It obscures the shared nature of exploitation and encourages rivalry over scarce resources, thereby weakening solidarity and preventing effective organization. Overcoming these manufactured divisions requires intentional education, dialogue, and the cultivation of trust and mutual recognition among the working class. Liberation is not merely the absence of direct oppression, it is the creation of a society in which individuals have control over the conditions of their labor, their communities, and their collective destiny. Class consciousness provides the intellectual and moral foundation for this vision. Solidarity supplies the relational and emotional glue that binds people together, and collective organization furnishes the strategic means to transform knowledge and unity into tangible social change. To ignore any one of these elements is to weaken the movement, for awareness without action is impotent. Solidarity without structure is fragile, and organization without shared consciousness is directionless. Together, they constitute the framework through which the working class can challenge the artificial hierarchies imposed upon them, reclaim the value of their labor, and reconstruct society in a manner that prioritizes collective well-being over private accumulation. In the face of systemic exploitation, these principles offer not only hope but a concrete methodology for resistance. They provide the tools by which those assigned the roles of subordination can understand their situation, unite across divisions, and assert power over the conditions that shape their lives, demonstrating that liberation is achievable only through the conscious, united, and organized action of the oppressed. True emancipation cannot be achieved through superficial reforms or appeals to the morality of those who benefit from exploitation. It requires a radical transformation of the economic and social structures that define our existence. At the heart of oppression lies control over the means of production, the factories, the land, the machinery, the tools, and the intellectual and technological frameworks that allow society to generate wealth. Under capitalism, these instruments of human productivity are concentrated in the hands of a small minority, extract value from the labor of the majority while offering only subsistence in return. The working class, which produces the wealth of society, is alienated from the very processes through which life is sustained and enriched, denied control over the fruits of its labor, and compelled to participate in a system that prioritizes profit over human need. Reclaiming the means of production is therefore not merely an economic necessity but a moral and political imperative. When the tools of labor are held collectively by those who produce wealth, society is no longer structured to serve the accumulation of capital but to meet the needs of the community. This reclamation transforms the relationship between labor and life, converting work from a source of alienation into an expression of human creativity and agency. Ownership of the means of production must be democratized in a way that empowers workers to participate in decision-making, to control the distribution of resources, and to determine the objectives of production in accordance with social necessity rather than private gain. Such a transformation dismantles the structural hierarchies that enforce inequality and dependency, creating the material foundation for a society in which freedom is real, not merely formal. True emancipation also demands the overturning of systemic oppression in all its forms, for economic control is inseparable from political, social and cultural domination. The mechanisms that protect private property, enforce labor discipline, regulate markets, and legitimize inequality are embedded in laws, institutions, and ideologies that serve the interests of the ruling class. To challenge these structures is to confront the power that sustains exploitation, to expose the ways in which wealth and authority are maintained at the expense of the majority, and to assert the collective right of society to determine its own conditions of existence. Overturning systemic oppression requires not only material change but also consciousness and awareness among the oppressed, that their subjugation is neither natural nor necessary but imposed. This consciousness fuels collective action, the organization of communities, and the construction of alternatives to the social order that enforces submission. The struggle for emancipation cannot be confined to isolated economic reforms or temporary concessions. It must aim at the root of inequality, seeking to dismantle the social relations that allow a minority to dominate, exploit, and control the lives of the many. History demonstrates that such change is possible when workers and oppressed groups unite in common purpose. Revolutions, social movements, and collective struggles throughout time have shown that when the majority recognize their shared interests, organize effectively, and assert power over the structures that constrain them, society can be fundamentally transformed. Emancipation is therefore inseparable from collective action. The liberation of individuals is contingent upon the liberation of all, for no single person can escape the web of exploitation and hierarchy while it persists in the structures around them. Moreover, reclaiming the means of production is intimately connected to the broader goals of social justice, equality, and human flourishing. When society's resources are controlled collectively, when production serves human needs rather than private profit, and when decision-making is participatory, oppression loses its material basis. Poverty, exploitation, and dependency can be alleviated. Labor can become a source of dignity rather than alienation, and the conditions for genuine freedom and creativity can emerge. In such a society, the divisions imposed by class, privilege, and ownership are erased, replaced by relationships grounded in cooperation, mutual benefit, and shared responsibility. Yet achieving this requires more than abstract ideals. It demands struggle, organization, determination. The ruling class will not relinquish its control voluntarily, and the structures of exploitation are deeply entrenched. Resistance, therefore, must be active, persistent, and united, combining the awakening of consciousness with strategic action to seize control of the material and institutional levers of society. Education, labor organization, political engagement, and collective planning are all instruments in this struggle. Tools that allow the working majority to reclaim agency over their labor and lives. True emancipation is not a passive state or a gift bestowed from above. It is the product of conscious, collective effort to overturn the systems that confine, exploit, and subordinate. It is the transformation of society from one in which the majority labors for the enrichment of a few into one in which all contribute to and share in the wealth of their own creation, where social structures serve human needs rather than profit, and where freedom, equality, and dignity are realized in practice. In this sense, the reclamation of the means of production and the dismantling of systemic oppression are inseparable, forming the foundation upon which genuine human liberation can be constructed, allowing individuals and communities alike to shape their destinies and to create a society that reflects the full potential of collective human endeavor. Comrades, we have laid bare the truth that the roles assigned to us by the system are not natural nor earned, but imposed to divide, exploit, and control. We have seen that capitalism thrives on the labor of the many while enriching the few, that inequality is structural and intentional, and that the myth of meritocracy conceals the mechanisms of oppression. Yet understanding alone is not enough. Liberation demands awareness, solidarity, and organization, the recognition that our struggles are shared, and that our collective strength is greater than the sum of isolated effort. True emancipation requires that we reclaim the means of production, assert control over the fruits of our labor, and dismantle the structures that perpetuate inequality and subjugation. The path forward is not passive, it is a call to action, a summons to unite across divisions, to educate, to organize, and to fight for a society in which wealth, opportunity, and dignity are shared, not hoarded. History has shown that the power of the few depends upon the acquiescence of the many. And when the many awaken, when workers and oppressed peoples act together with consciousness and purpose, the hierarchy of winners and losers can be overturned. Our labor, our creativity, and our lives are the source of society's wealth, and only by claiming them collectively can we build a world that serves humanity rather than profit. Let this knowledge ignite the struggle, let it inspire solidarity, and let it guide our organized action toward a future in which oppression is no longer accepted and true freedom belongs to all.